Well, hey, good morning. Good morning. So glad to be with you guys here this morning. If we haven't met before, my name is Nico. I'm the Next Gen pastor here at Bridgeway. And I am we're joining in on this series we've been going through the last few weeks called Fully Alive, where we have been talking about everyone's favorite thing to talk about in church, and that's sin, right? I'm so glad you're here. But no, in this series, what we have been trying to do is kind of try to move past some of the guilt and the shame that kind of is normally associated with sin and kind of get to the root of it. Hopefully get it to the point where maybe you don't have as much baggage with it, and hopefully get to a place where you can experience more freedom, kind of have more freeing conversations about it. Because if you're anything like me, when I was growing up, I think I always viewed sin as like this giant list of all the things that I wanted to do, but I knew were off limits, right? And it was almost like God was like this big cosmic killjoy coming in going, no, don't do all the fun things, right? But that's not really what sin is. And if you're a parent, you know this all the time, right? We make rules for our kids, not because, as my kids would say, I'm not making a bedtime because I'm trying to kill the party and be a monster, right? No, what I'm actually trying to do is I'm trying to help them be productive members of society, because I don't want you to stay up till 3 a.m. and then not listen at school, get mad with everybody, right? Like, it only hurts everyone when they break that rule. And like we've been talking through this series, kind of a big idea is God hates sin because sin hurts us, right? And that means that like when we sin, it's not just hurting us. Oftentimes it's also hurting God, and it's also hurting our relationship with others, depending on what it is. And so what we want to do through this series is make it so that we aren't living out of a place of insecurity, a place of shame, but instead can be living out of the blessing that we have from God. And so we've been going through what are called the 7 deadly sins. And this was actually some sins that some early monks in the 4th century wrote down, and then they came through kind of through Christian tradition to now kind of being known as the 7 deadly sins. So if you've been missing it, every week we've kind of been going through a different one of the sins. And let me tell you, today we got a doozy. You should be glad you're here, because this is literally known as the no fun sin. This is known as the most miserable of the 7 deadly sins. Glad you're here, right? This is the one that of all the sins on the 7 deadly sins list is most miserable, because there's not even like that instant, like that moment of like enjoyment in it. It is just literally only brings you down. Because most of the ones that we've talked about and the ones that we'll be talking about, there's like that moment where there's a reason we're telling people like, maybe don't do this, right? Because there's that moment that you enjoy it, right? Like, in the second week of the series, we talked about wrath, right? And like, there's a moment of wrath that we kind of enjoy, right? There's a reason I have to tell someone not to. Going back to when I was in middle school, we had a computer. This was back in the day before everyone had phones, and we just had one computer in our house, had AOL, America Online, just living our best life. You got mail, you're hearing the sound of it connecting, all of it right now in your head, right? And we all had to share it, right? And I remember one day, getting up, I was like, instant messaging all my friends, having a great time, got up, I can't remember, I was going to get a drink, had to do something, and came back, and my sister was sitting in the computer chair, had logged me out, and now I was, of course, furious, right? I was like, no, get out, this is my turn, I'm on here, and she didn't listen. And so in that moment, my wrath, I was so angry, I then took her head and smashed it into the keyboard. And let me tell you, from here to here, I felt great, right? So I was like, nah, I'm older brother. I'm in control. This felt amazing. And then as she lifted her head and I could see like all the key prints indented in her forehead, I realized real quick, like, oh man, I might be a little bit too old to be doing this now to my little sister. And then number 2, mom and dad are going to be so mad, right? Like, it was enjoyable for that one quick moment, and then it was very fleeting. In the same way with 2 weeks ago, we talked about greed, right? There is something about greed. Like, we want to have more things. There's something about us that wants more things. And so it feels good, at least for that initial thing when you're like getting that new thing. And then until you realize like, oh man, that only felt good for like a second. Now I need more, right? Or one of the things that we talked about last week was sloth, right? And if you're like me, like, why do what I can do now when I can do it later, right? Like, there is so often, like, in that moment, I'm like, oh yeah, this feels great. I'm just relaxing. Not even thinking about the fact that, tomorrow I'm going to have to work twice as hard and it's going to be miserable, right? Like, all these sins all have like that one moment of just pure, like, oh yeah, this feels good, until it doesn't, right? This one doesn't even have that. That's how low of a sin this is. And it's also one that for sure every person in this room has felt. It's been one of the things that is used the most in like storytelling. Like Shakespeare wrote about this. You see it in like stories like The Lion King, and probably every reality TV show you've ever watched for sure uses this emotion. And you are for sure feeling this emotion being here with me instead of on a beach right now. And that is, can we do a little drum roll? Can we do a drum roll for the sin of the day? Yep, go ahead. The sin of the day, envy. That's what we're talking about. Envy. I know, everyone's pumped they were here. You're right. No, we were talking about this, and part of why this matters so much is I'm going to throw up Proverbs 14:30. So this is what the Bible says, talking about envy. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones, right? There's something about envy that's almost like toxic to us. It can take the things that we have, and even though nothing has changed, all of a sudden that envy has made it so that we don't like it anymore. And all of a sudden it feels less than. And it can kind of just eat at us from the inside out. And as we kind of get going this morning, I want to kind of just do a little bit of like a definition, because I'll be honest, I don't think, envy is definitely not a word I normally use in my everyday life. I think I normally say jealousy. But one of the things I've discovered this week is envy and jealousy are actually two completely different things. Very close, but they are still two different things. So real quick, envy is this feeling of desire for what somebody else has, right? It's that feeling that you have, like when you hear like someone has so much money, you're like, oh, I wish I just had some of that. It's that feeling of that title that somebody has at work, and you're like, man, I wish I had that. I wish I did that. Or that achievement that somebody else got, and you're like, man, I wish I would give up anything to have that, right? That's what envy is. And I think a lot of times I just call that jealousy, but it's actually a little bit different. Jealousy is the fear of losing something you already have to somebody else, right? Like this is why you don't want that person hanging out with your significant other or your boyfriend, girlfriend, right? Because you're like, oh no, that person's about to try to take my other person, right? Like this is that person, or that you don't like it when that new employee gets hired because they're really, really good at their job. And you're like, this person might be taking my position someday. This person might do whatever, right? Like envy is that feeling of desire for what someone else has. And jealousy is a fear of losing what you already have to somebody else. And again, even though these are known as like twin emotions, they're very similar. A lot of times they pop up at the same time. I think there's some value in kind of knowing the difference. And specifically, yes, there's, again, going to be some overlap with jealousy. But this morning, we're talking more specifically just about envy. Because I think envy is one of those things that we all know it's bad. No one enjoys being envious. But it's really hard to stop, right? Because part of it is that we are just really social people, right? Like even from our earliest moments of human life, like every baby is looking for two eyes turned towards it, right? There's a quote that I heard this week from Andy Crouch. He's an author. He said, recognition is the first human quest, right? Like there is something about us that cares so much about what other people think of us. And maybe you're here and you're like, I don't care what anybody else thinks about us. You're lying. Like you literally got yourself so fooled that you don't even know that you're like, everybody cares about what other people, you might not care what everybody thinks about you, but you definitely have people around you that you care what they think about you. In fact, this is like so ingrained into us. They've shown studies that show babies as young as 6 months old, or 6 months old grimace when their mom picks up like a fake baby, right? Like 6 months old, we're already feeling this. And babies that don't get like the attention that they're supposed to from their parents actually develop different neural pathways in their brain growing up. Like this is something that is like hardwired into us. So from our very first moments, there is something about us that we are just inescapably social creatures looking outside of ourselves to find value. And if you are a parent, again, you have experienced this because one of the phrases that you will hear all the time is, mommy, look, daddy, look, right? A couple weeks ago, we have a shed in our backyard, and I was trying to, you know what, this is a great day, try to clean out the shed. And I was like, I got some time. So I was going out to clean out the shed. And then my daughter, who's 5, there's a trampoline in our backyard, and she said, hey, Daddy, can I jump on the trampoline while you're cleaning the shed? And I said, that sounds great. Like, there's a whole net in there. I can just zip you up. This is like a free babysitter. You're just locked in there. I'm going to go do my thing, right? And so then I put her in the trampoline. I start going to the shed, and I'm not even into the shed yet. And she goes, Daddy, look. And I turn around, and she does one of these. Like literally like the most unremarkable thing you could ever do on a trampoline, right? Like it's what everybody does. You're jumping. And I go, hey, way to go, sweetie. What a great jump, right? And then I'm like, all right, time to work on the shed. And then before I can still get into the shed, it is then that she has just like fell over on the trampoline, goes, Daddy, look, I can lay here. And I'm like, this is not impressive, right? Like the most unremarkable stuff. And it lasted that way for about 30 minutes. And I think maybe I moved 2 things in our shed, right? Like it just continued because she wants my approval. She wants me to see what she is doing and give her approval on it, even though it's not that special, right? Anybody can do those moves. But this part about us being so social is really good in some ways, right? Like it drives us to look outside of ourselves for relationships because we can't live life on our own, right? And there's also part of it is like there's something good about comparison, right? That we need to be able to look at other people and be able to see like basically like how we are like different skill-wise, different talent-wise compared to other people, right? There's a reason when I was in high school, I stopped playing basketball because my dream of being an NBA player wasn't going to happen. So I looked at other people playing basketball. I'm like, oh no, they're way better than me, right? Like that is how it goes. So we need to be able to compare it against other people, but it's also our Achilles heel. Because as soon as we start looking at other people, I don't know if you've noticed this before, life isn't fair, right? All of a sudden we start looking around going, oh yeah, they have way more money than me. Or maybe that person has the achievements that I wish I had. Or man, if I had a person like that in my life, or if I had a family like that, man, my life would be so much different. We just play that, if I just had fill in the blank, everything would be so much better. And isn't it funny how good we are at just being storytellers as soon as we get into that mode of like, oh man, I bet their life is perfect. They only post the only amazing pictures of their lives on social media. I've had so many people like come up to me after a service and go, man, your family is just so delightful. I bet you guys just laugh all the time. Let me tell you, we don't. It's just not the case. It's not how life is. Everybody has the different things that they're dealing with. And isn't it funny, just as a little side note, that we always complain about like how like maybe people have more money than us, but we very rarely ever complain that people have less money than us. It's 100% very one-sided. And whether it's real or not, we have these things where we are just kind of feeling envious of other people. And we even get to a point where sometimes when we kind of get to a really dark stage in envy where we just start to decide if that person deserves what they have or not, that, oh, like I would work so much harder. I work harder than they do. I deserve more than they do. And it's all coming from envy. There's this quote about envy that I saw this week that really resonated with me, and it said this: envy is a clue to who we wish we were, indicating dissatisfaction with who we actually are. Right? It's kind of that clue of like, man, the reason we get envious is because there's something about that person that we wish was more like what we want. Because isn't it true that we don't tend to feel envious about people who are way different than you? Right? We feel envy towards people who like have things that kind of feel more central to our identity or things that we want, right? Like I remember not too long ago hearing about somebody who had climbed Mount Everest. Let me tell you, I felt zero envy of that person. I think at one point in my life I would have felt envy because I always thought in my mind that, oh yeah, that's like a day thing where you just kind of like climb the thing. No. It's months of preparation, and then it's like multiple weeks climbing up the mountain, sleeping in a tent, in the snow. Like it's a literal nightmare scenario. There's nothing about that makes me feel envious. But this last summer, I was hanging out with one of my buddies from like high school, college, and we were kind of talking about work stuff. And he was complaining about his bonus that he was going to get. And his bonus was like about like 2.5 times what I get paid in like a year. And that was just his bonus. And let me tell you, in that moment, I felt envy real strong. Just thinking like, oh my gosh, that's life-changing money, right? And like instantly feeling like, man, all that envy started to build up in me. This week, I also found out there is a world record for how many snails have been on one person's face at one time for 10 seconds. The answer is 48 seconds, just so you know. That's the world record if you want to try to beat it. You can Google it. It's a real gross picture of snails on somebody's face. But let me tell you, when I heard that record, I was like, I do not want that record. Nothing about me is envious. But sometimes when I get on social media and I'm like following like different churches, different student ministries, there's times when I like see like some of the things that other people have. And I'm like, man, wish we had that. If we had that, man, this would be so cool, right? And all of a sudden I can start to feel that envy start to build up in myself because it's something that I feel like is central to my identity that I want, right? And I know this is kind of like one of those statements that you've heard and you already know this, but I feel like we always need to talk about it when we talk about this kind of like envy and comparison, is that comparison is the thief of joy. Again, it is the sin that only brings you down. Envy doesn't inspire us to be better. It just makes us mad and frustrated and sad that we don't have that. So as we kind of go through this morning, the question for you is, where is envy stealing your joy? Like, where in your life is envy, what you're looking at, what you're focusing at, stealing joy from your life? Because envy did not start with HGTV and shiplap and all the things, right? That is not where envy started. And it did not start with social media, even though, again, I know social media can definitely cause a lot of envy, right? But envy is something we have been dealing with as long as we have been humans. So, what do? Well, I want to look at a story in the Old Testament of the book of 1 Samuel, and just to kind of catch you up a little bit, even if you haven't grown up in church, this is probably, at least the beginning of the story, kind of the prelude to the story, is so you probably already know, because we're talking about David and Goliath. So, just to kind of like a real quick recap, there was like these two warring nations, there's the Philistines and God's people, the Israelites, and instead of going like, hey, you know what, instead of like having all of us just fight and all of this bloodshed, how about you send out your best person and we'll send out our best person, right? Their best person just happened to be a giant of a man who was really like intimidating and no one wanted to fight. And then they had this only person who would fight against him was this guy named David, who would go to be king, but he was not king yet. He was just a lowly little boy right now. Ends up beating him. And so as you can imagine, like celebration, all these good things, right? So this is what we see 1 Samuel 18:5. It says this, it says, whatever mission Saul, and this was King Saul, he was the king at the time. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well, right? Like this was good. This was a good situation, right? For like Saul, like this is like, oh, hey, you got an employee that is doing so good. He's making you look really good, right? This is like when you have like a team, like when there's a player that's really good and like it makes everyone think that the coach is really good. And when that player leaves, all of a sudden you're like, oh no, that coach wasn't that good. It was just that player was that good, right? Like this is making Saul look really good having David around. And what I think is really interesting is that it said this pleased all of the troops and Saul's officers as well when he gave him a promotion, right? That's how you know David was good at what he was doing, right? Because normally when you hear about a promotion, it is always like, well, this person got it, but they didn't really deserve it. Or I should have got it. They've just been around longer. If I had that kind of time or if I had that kind of connection, whatever it is, right? There's always excuses for why this person got the promotion and not the other person. And David is so good that even his coworkers, even the other officers are like, yeah, get this guy a promotion. He needs to be higher, right? And so they're coming in, and then this is the next part of the story. It says, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, talking about Goliath, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, with timbrels and lyres. And they danced and they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, right? Like imagine like this moment. This is like your team just won like the championship, right? And they do those big giant celebrations. Everyone's coming in on the parade. There's people just lining the streets, just celebrating, excited. And like David's in this and, King Saul is probably in there. And like everyone is just celebrating, cheering for these two guys and everyone else like coming in to the city. It's a giant party. And they start singing songs. And what I will say, like, they had timbrels and lyres, which that is like a tambourine and a harp. I can't imagine the songs were that good. Like, this isn't like All I Do Is Win or like We Are the Champions, right? Like, this is like, I don't know, if there's good songs with like, I don't know, a harp and a little tambourine, go ahead, send them to me later this week. I'd love to hear them. Just can't imagine it has quite the same impact. But they're sitting there singing songs, and they're even giving King Saul his flowers, right? They're like, Saul has slain his thousands. Like, they're singing like, man, the king is good, right? And then they continue the song, and it has this last part. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Whew. You can imagine like this record-scratching moment, right? Sorry, that was a horrible impersonation. This is like when King Saul all of a sudden goes, whoa, wait a minute. I'm getting the silver medal in this scenario. And then we even see just right after that, it says, and from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Like David, in his defense, was just following orders, right? He is just doing what he's just doing what he's supposed to do, right? Like he's just doing what the king had asked him to do. And Saul, again, he was the king, and he wasn't like a king that like nobody liked. Like he was a well-liked king. He was rich. He was powerful. He literally had everything you could imagine. And yet, as soon as David started to get maybe just an inkling of more popularity than him, all of a sudden Saul's focus and attention goes from all the things that he has and starts getting really envious of David. He got so focused on David, he lost himself and everything that he was working for and dreaming for, right? And this is the thing, that what Saul was experiencing, what we experienced, that envy is like this insult to yourself. It's ignoring the blessings that you have in your own life for someone else's blessings. I've heard it said before, like, count your blessings, not your neighbors, right? There is something about envy that no matter how much Saul had, it wasn't going to be enough because he didn't have this one thing that David had. And I think Saul was missing the plot. So to jump stories real quick, I want to share real quick just about Jesus' baptism and why I think it completely shaped and changed his entire ministry. Because when Jesus got baptized, he was about 30 years old, and we don't know a whole lot about Jesus before he was 30. We have, of course, the stories we talk about at Christmas with him being born. We have one story when he was 12, where he was at like the temple learning and growing. And then he starts his ministry at 30. So at 30, he has done nothing that we think about when we think about Jesus, right? Has done none of the miracles, done none of the healing people, not given anybody food, not done any of those things. He's living with his parents as a 30-year-old man. Let me just tell you, yeah, this might sound a little crass, but in today's culture, we'll be like, man, he's kind of a bum, right? Like hasn't done anything, 30 years old, living with his parents. And what's amazing is that at that moment, when he starts his ministry, the first thing he does before he does any miracle, goes and gets baptized by John the Baptist and comes up out of the water. And there's this dove that flies down on his shoulder, representing the Holy Spirit. And then that says the clouds open up, and God the Father says, "This is my Son, whom I am well pleased." And I think the reason that Jesus' ministry and Jesus was who he was because he never doubted that. He kept that in the forefront of his mind. He knew that his identity wasn't in what he had or what other people had. No, it was the fact that he was loved by God. That was his number one identity, more than everything else. When everyone else was trying to get him to do different things or asking different favors, all these things, he's like, yeah, I can do that if it fits in the fact that I am loved by God. That is my main focus. And Saul had that same love, right? We experienced that same love from God, but he lost the plot. Instead of saying focus on the fact that he was loved by God, that he was literally a king who was anointed by God to be there in the first place, he then became like this lesser version of what he should have been. He got so focused on David, it ended up leading to his literal death. Like he literally gave up his life trying to like catch David and trying to like kill David and ends up dying in battle trying to catch David. Like the question I have for you this morning is, are you so focused on somebody else that you stopped living your own life? Like, are you so focused on what other people have that you're not really even enjoying the things that you have anymore? I heard this quote this week that I've been thinking about all week long. It's from Jordan Peterson. He's an author. He says this: compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Man, could you imagine when it comes to envy, how much this would change everything? Instead of looking at what everybody else has and what we have or they don't have or what I don't have, if instead we were like, you know what, I just want to take another step forward today. I want to take another step to continue growing as a person. But instead, we kind of miss it because we just look to try to imitate other people, right? But I think when we're really in the healthiest place, we look to others for inspiration, not imitation. When we can look at other people and go like, oh yeah, this is inspiring. This can kind of encourage me to go forward instead of just imitating them where we try to just have what they have. It changes everything. And like, I'll be honest, like this is like one of the main reasons I really struggle with social media. If you know me well, like I have social media accounts, but I don't really check them all that often. Just because like for me, like I have felt it so many times in my life where like I have been scrolling through social media and I was having a great day and all of a sudden I spent 10 minutes looking at my phone and now I feel like this pit inside of me because I'm like seeing what everyone else has. And even though I know their family isn't that perfect, nothing's going on, right? They're not any more perfect than me. It feels like that. Again, we become really good storytellers. And maybe some of you are like, no, but like I'm honest. Like I know I have a few friends on social media who are like, have like those moments where like, yeah, I had this hard time with my kid and they'll like say something and it's always like the most profound thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, your kids are incredible. I don't know what kind of kids you got, what kind of things you're learning. But like, we're never really honest on social media, right? Like I got in a fight with my son earlier this week. And let me tell you, I did not in that moment go, I'm going to take a picture of you, take a picture of me, show everyone how mad we are right now and talk about it on social media, right? Because like that's not a normal thing to do. It's always going to be just the highlight reels and not what's really going on in somebody's life. And so for some of you, I know like I'm not going to talk to anybody about like getting off of social media. I'm not that good of a communicator, right? But maybe for you, like maybe that's something you need to start limiting. Maybe like I put mine to like 15 minutes a day because I've noticed that like when I have more than that, most of the time I don't even remember what I'm looking at anymore. And I just kind of get into a dark place with like what I'm looking at. Or maybe for some of you like, man, it's going to make me feel old. Maybe some of you are like, no, it's going to make you feel young still. But when I was high school and college, there was one channel I used to watch all the time, it was MTV. At that point, they had already gotten rid of most of the music videos. But they had this show called MTV Cribs that I used to love watching. And if you've never seen it before, it's literally just celebrities like going through their house, showing you their house, right? And I remember one day literally sitting in my college dorm and like all of a sudden feeling really depressed because I didn't have 3 jacuzzis in my house. And like an elevator and all the things, right? And I remember literally it was like one day I was like, you know what? This is literally just making me miserable. Like, and at that point, like, yeah, I was like living in a dorm, which is like, you know, pretty rough place to live. But like, even like my parents, like when I wasn't at school, and I was going to their house, like they had a pretty big house, even for like American standards, right? And like all of a sudden I was feeling less than and feeling like I didn't really like where I lived. All because of this dumb show, right? And so it was literally, I remember that day, I was like, you know what, I'm never watching this again. And just like turned it off because I didn't need that influence in my life making me feel envious. And what's funny about that show, I actually found this out just a couple of years ago, that a lot of times when the celebrities were showing their homes, that wasn't even really their home. A lot of them were encouraged to like go and like rent giant mansions so they could show them off for the show and then go back to their normal house, right? So like literally I was getting envy over something that wasn't even real. The envy was fake, right? And the thing is, whether it's social media, whether it's shows, whatever it is that we're, you know, watching, whatever we give our attention is what our lives turn into, right? And so for me, like if I'm giving up all my time and attention to social media, being envious of others, of all these different things, man, it's just making me feel empty. And I would guess that it's doing the same thing for you. So our question is like, what do we do? Like, what do we do about this envy? Where do we turn our focus? And so if you've been here through this series, there's been one thing that we've kind of said throughout the whole series about what to do with this sin in our lives. And this is the first one I'm excited to say it, is repent. Sorry, I've always wanted to yell that from the stage. If you've been with us, this has been like our first step each week. And I know repent sounds like this old churchy word, and some of you are like, this is not the kind of church I thought I was going to, right? But no, repent just means to turn away from, right? I think so often in a message like this, and I've been guilty of this, so I'm not trying to, call anybody out. There's so many times when we can like leave this and like go to lunch and we're like talking about what we learned, and then we're all like, I have envy in my life. I have envy in my life. And we all kind of talk about how we're all broken, have envy in our lives, and then that's it. Like we don't do anything about it. It's almost like we think it's like this cute little pet hanging around with us, right? Your sin, your envy isn't cute. Like, do something about it. Like, do something to change it. Whether it's putting limits on the things you have, changing the people that you're hanging out with, whatever you got to do something. Saul forgot who he was. He let other people give him his identity. So the question for you is, where are you spending too much time focused on others? Where are you spending too much time focused on what other people have? Like, are you competing against somebody who doesn't even know there's a competition? Like, for you, what is going on? And so besides repent, sorry, feels like a lot happening over here. The other big idea, and I think the antidote to our envy, is when we do this. Is that when we see you the way God sees you. See you the way that God sees you. Because again, so often, I feel like we are like King Saul, where we have so many blessings, so many things in our lives, but instead of getting focused on those, we get so caught up in what everybody else has, or what we wish we had, or what we could have, right, if we hadn't made that choice. And we just get full of envy to the point where we don't even like the things that we have anymore. And you used to love them. It used to be the thing that gave you so much life, and now you are like so focused on everyone else instead of being focused on the truth that you are loved, just like Jesus is loved by God. And that when we have that focus, all of a sudden we realize, oh, you know what? Those things are like, yeah, they're kind of important, but they don't identify me. They don't define me like Jesus's love does for me. I think sometimes, I think I've even used this illustration before, but I got to use it again because I don't know how else to do it. We need to get better at our I'm not that muscle. And you might be thinking, like, what is an I'm not that muscle? So my daughter, she is really strong on what her name is. Where like her name is Junia, and if I call her like, Junie Booney, get over here, she'll be like, I'm not that, Daddy. I am Junia Faye Gruber. Like, always real intense, always hits me with the middle, or first, middle, and last name, right? It was like real intense. Like a couple weeks ago, for like a couple days, she wanted to be the orange Ninja Turtle Michelangelo. And so she kept saying for a couple days, like, I'm Mikey, Daddy, I'm Mikey, Daddy. I'm like, all right, good. And then the next day when she decided she didn't want to be Mikey anymore, like, hey, Mikey, get on over here. She goes, I'm not that, Daddy. I am Junia Faye Gruber, right? Like that kind of intensity. And I think all of us need to get better at that I'm not that, right? Because other people don't get to give you an identity unless you accept it. And so for you, what is that thing that you need to start looking, instead of looking at what everyone else has for our identity and looking at the things that we have or wish we had, instead fixing our eyes on Jesus and the love that he has for us. And replacing it. Instead of taking that like, oh man, their life is so perfect. I wish I had that kind of life. Like looking at everyone else going, no. I am a child of the King. That's where my identity is. Or looking at everyone else going, man, I wish I had a little bit more. I wish I had enough like they did. I wish I had fill in the blank, right? Instead going like, no, God gave me these incredible gifts. And locking eyes with Jesus. Or like, you know what? I wish I would have had that. I wish I could have done that. I wish I had the things that they had. No, like I am loved by God. Like that is where my identity comes from. It doesn't make it so that we are less than. So whatever that looks like for you, we have to find ways to remind ourselves how to do that. Maybe for you, it is 100% just kind of being more, paying attention to when you're feeling envious and not just going like, all right, it's okay for this to be here for a little bit. But like, no, like in that moment going, no, I'm going to replace this. I'm going to take this fake, not real news and replace it with truth, right? Or maybe for you, it's just a reminder, like I've had seasons of my life where like when I can feel like I am caring way too much about what other people think, where I've literally set an alarm in my phone to go off in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening that just says you are loved. Just so no matter what was going on in my day, I had to have that pause of just like, oh man, I am loved. Like it doesn't matter. All these other things are important, but they don't define who I am. I am just loved by God. Or maybe for some of us, like it's like taking that time in the morning and actually getting like that quiet time. I've heard the stat, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's more than half of Americans, as we wake up, the very first thing we do is like look at social media and scroll. Like, can you just imagine like how bad that is for us? And I'm not trying to hate on anybody. I've done that so many times. I did it like 3 days ago, right? But there is something about us that like, can you imagine how bad that is for us that the very first thing we do is open up social media and just start to get envious of what other people have, what other people have been doing, the things we've been missing out on? What if instead we actually took that time to go, you know what, I'm going to take some time that even if it's just 5 minutes to just focus in on who I really am because of God's love for me. And what's amazing is that when we can get to a place where we see that as our identity, all of a sudden we can start to see others the way that God sees others. And we can actually start to celebrate people like we don't normally celebrate, not like the fake celebration or like the fake congratulation. It's like, no, like I can actually celebrate you because that isn't where my identity comes from. My identity comes from the fact that I am loved by God. And I think some of you, and I'm here a lot of days too, where sometimes we feel like we can't find our identity in that because we feel like maybe we're too annoying to God. And we're like, man, but God has got to be annoyed with me. I haven't lived up to the potential I have. Or maybe we feel like God's frustrated with us. Maybe he's mad with us, angry with us. There's something about us that we feel like is kind of holding us back from really finding our identity in the fact that we are loved. It's almost like we're scared that God doesn't love us enough, or he's not going to cover up that whatever thing that you're holding onto. And I'm here to tell you that no, that is a lie straight from the devil. Like, you are loved by God as you are right now. I'll end with this. A few years ago, my sons, they were going to run cross country. And my sons, they've both been like super athletes in all the sports they play. Like I remember especially like when they were younger, when they were playing soccer, it was like they were the kids that we had to like put extra rules on because they were like scoring too many goals, things like that, right? And then one day they decided they wanted to run cross country. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, they are going to crush it. They're going to just destroy everyone else. This is going to be a bloodbath. This is going to be rough, right? Like all the things that you say as a parent, right? And like the course they were on, they were going to start the race, and then they were going to kind of go into the woods, and they kind of came out in the woods a little ways later, and then you kind of really see where everyone's at. And I remember as I was watching, the race starts, they shoot the gun, and I'm like cheering, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And I'm like trying to not like kind of like brag too much in front of the other parents about how my kids are about to be first place coming out of here after their first race. And as I'm like running over to like where they come out of the woods, and the first couple kids come through, and they're not my kids. And I'm like, all right, it's all right. Keep on going. They'll be number 3, number 4. And they keep, kid after kid comes out. And to the point where like my kids, I'll be honest, were kind of like in the middle of the pack. And as soon as I saw them leaving the woods and like coming out to that part of the race, I remember like just tears, like streaming down my face, like not like cool cry. Like the ugly cry where you're like, come on, don't look at me. Like, oh yeah, I got something in my eye, kind of like looking down, right? Because I don't want the other parents to see me. And it wasn't because I was mad or frustrated. It was because I was just so proud of them in that moment. That even though they weren't as fast as maybe I thought they were going to be in that moment, and they weren't as slow as maybe they could have been, I was just so proud to just watch them run that race. And that even though they probably weren't even trying their hardest, because to be honest, they didn't last very long. They did not like cross country. They did not kind of keep doing it, right? They weren't even trying their best because they mostly were just like, Dad, this kind of just feels like a punishment. I'm like, yeah, I get that, buddy. But like in that moment, like just being so proud of them no matter what, just to see them, just to get to witness them like competing, doing this thing. And God feels that same way about you. That right now, no matter how you feel like your life is gone, maybe right now it feels like everything's going great, and maybe it's a little bit easier to believe that. Or maybe you're here and you feel like everything has just been real frustrating and exhausting right now. And maybe you're even dealing with some of the consequences of some of your own actions. Man, even if that's where you're at, just know that God loves you just like that. An incredible love that you can't even begin to imagine loves you as you are. Or maybe you're here and you just feel like, man, life has just felt so mundane and boring, and it's just one thing after another. And you're like, this is all life is. Man, God still loves you as you are. And if we can get that into our hearts, into our minds, man, it'll change everything for us when it comes to envy. Instead of looking at what everyone else has, being reminded that God is where our identity comes from.